Welcome to Straight to the Point. I'm your host, Representative Joe Diorsi. In a world of long-windedness, I'm here to deliver you the Capitol News in 10 minutes or less. So, let's get straight to the point. So, welcome to the Straight to the Point podcast. I have a very special guest dialing in from the Philadelphia suburbs. He is a contributor for Broad and Liberty, Real Clear Politics. He's also a senior fellow for the Commonwealth Foundation and a frequent guest on Philadelphia area radio and TV. He's Guy Ciarrocchi. Guy, thanks for joining.
Sure, good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
So let's start with, so you're a newsman. I kind of, my expertise gravitates toward the media. Let's discuss legacy media. That's kind of a newly coined term, say mainstream media. Right. What has been the downfall and the plight of mainstream media, and why?
Yeah, well, it's a great question, because ultimately at the end of the day, part of the way that we have a debate about issues and have elections is a debate of ideas and learn about candidates. And I think, we can all look, there may not have been a seminal moment, like a pinpoint moment, but certainly over the last few decades, what you and I used to think of as the news, ABC, NBC, CBS, or just picking up a newspaper and sort of the major papers, whether it was the New York Times, the Philadelphia Inquirer, the Harrisburg Patriot, you realize that they morphed from news into advocacy journalism. And we all knew for years, if your views were conservative, that on the editorial page, they didn't necessarily agree with us, right? Especially in where I come from, the Philadelphia area. They were not going to endorse a Republican for president or governor or major office. But you notice it started to bleed into the headlines in the news. And as you and I were having another conversation, it's now morphed into things like, the arts and leisure, the architecture, the Phillies, right? There was a story in the Philadelphia Inquirer they did a few months back about how climate change was going to ruin Major League Baseball because pitchers weren't going to be able to pitch as long in the intense heat that was inevitably coming to the United States. And I think if you're at a point where you're the Philadelphia Inquirer and you're trying to be a regional, even a national newspaper, and you can't even report on the sports without talking about climate change, you've tipped over into advocacy.
Yep.
And I think the end result is folks like you and me have looked for alternative sources because the things that our parents grew up trusting, you no longer do. And I think it's further pushed us apart as a country because we're not all going to the same places to learn about what happened and why. Yeah,
that kind of, the story you bring up about the Phillies and climate change destroying Major League Baseball. I'm sure it's always been tough to pitch if you're a Texas Ranger in July and August. Certainly more comfortable if you're a Detroit Tiger. But that kind of subliminal embedding of theories really is one of the reasons I left. I haven't been consuming traditional media for decades because I think I, like most people, Guy, want to pick up an article and get the facts. And within the first two sentences, like you mentioned, if it's abundantly clear that the author is progressive and they're trying to push something in particular, I'm done.
Yeah, and I think what happens, therefore, as a society, is the ability to understand where the other folks, stand in their shoes. We're not able to do that anymore because everything's couched that way. And therefore, the dialogue breaks down because, if we all agree on the facts, then we can disagree about what caused the facts or how to fix it. But if we don't all agree on the facts, then how do you ever reach consensus? And if you don't trust pure data, test scores are this, or the economy grew at this rate. Think about what happened the last year without going into all of it, but even through the presidential election, how anything that came out of the Biden White House was treated sort of like, the 10 Commandments, the message had come down from the mountain. 12 months last year, each of the months reported the unemployment results or the job creation data. Just look at the job creation. For 10 of the 12 months last year, the Biden administration's data was wrong. And not just wrong, like they said we created 60,000 jobs and it was really 59. I mean, but at times they said 60,000 jobs and you found out it was really they lost 12,000. And the media just reported it robotically without ever suggesting, even, hey, like, so you mess up in April, you mess up in May, you mess up in June. At what point does someone from the Philadelphia Inquirer or the Harrisburg Patriot or the New York Times or the CNN raise their hand at a briefing and say, what you and I would say to our kids, what you and I would say to a business partner? Why is this to be trusted? That when you were wrong 3 months in a row, and that part of journalism has disappeared. They are reporting what they're told by people who they're ideologically aligned with. So you have to go to somewhere else because you no longer trust the facts, let alone the analysis.
Yeah, so there's two layers here. I mean, as you described with the White House getting their numbers wrong, certainly the New York Times sticks out in my mind as a publication that's needed to retract many articles over the last few years. So there's what I would describe as deceptive tactics, like if all you talk about when you're discussing the health of an economy is unemployment rate and you neglect things like wages, earnings, labor participation rate, et cetera, that's a little bit deceptive. You're choosing what to push, and rational minds you would hope would consider the others. But then there's this layer of why would I trust the New York Times if a third of their articles are being retracted or edited after the fact because they're not correct? And this is exactly why you have these alternative media folks on X, on Instagram, on YouTube. And I have to point out, Guy, I'm sure you're aware of the statistic, but the only demographic this past election cycle that moved further left was boomers. And the reason, of course, is because they consume traditional media. Can you speak to the trend we've seen in alternative media, particularly on X?
Yeah, I think what's happening is people are looking for an alternative view, but also people that are conservative are looking for, in some cases, look, we're human. You want to hear your voice echoed. You want that affirmation. But also I think people are turning to X and whatever else they might use, even something as basic as Facebook or Instagram, because for those that want to be advocates, you want to learn what the story is, right? So whether you're still concerned about the overreach and the lack of apologies on COVID, and you're looking to Alex Berenson or some of those folks, or the whole issue of men and women's sports, and you're looking to Jennifer Say, you're going not just for somebody that you can sort of, pound your fist and say, yeah, but you're looking for what's that thoughtful analysis of what's happening around the country. So you're turning to these sources because whether you can hope and pray, but the CNN, CBS, the Philadelphia Inquirer is not going to give it to you. So you're going to X because, to me in particular, I'm going to X not just because of the 180 characters, but I'm looking to see, who do I want to go learn more about? Mm-hmm. I got this, in other words, X and Twitter that's the headline. So you've now shown me you're someone I want to go learn more about and read, because even if I don't agree with every point, it's thoughtful and it's data driven. And that's why I think you're going there. And it's one of the reasons for me, when I write, I'll avoid the East-West Pennsylvania war of the deeply held issue of Wawa versus Sheets. But I say that I try to cull information on issues like school choice or whatever it might be, even climate, in a way that if you're standing in line at Sheets or Wawa and waiting for your sandwich, and somebody says, hey, did you know that, 68% of kids in Pennsylvania can't do grade level math? And now we can have a dialogue. And then when I write, I try to take those sources that I trust and cull it down to maybe 800 words that's a little more thoughtful, but I'm going to invite you to go learn more because you don't see it anywhere else.
Yeah. So you mentioned school choice. Let's turn our gaze here to the topic of education. I've known you to be a school choice advocate. Certainly that's been one of my focuses here in the legislature. I'm reintroducing my Student Freedom Account Act again this session. What's your take on education, and why do you support school choice with such vigor?
Yeah, for me, it's the most important, certainly domestic public policy issue here in the state. Why? Because it's the great leveler. It's the key to the American dream. And what do all those wonderful, lofty thoughts mean? It's the way America, one of the things that was embedded in our society is that our kids would do better than us. That America 10 years from now will be stronger than it is today. Education is what does that. For somebody like myself, I was the first child in my family to go to college. My parents didn't. My grandparents didn't. A good education does not guarantee success, and it doesn't entitle you to success, but it opens it. What's worse now, as you know, because of the work you've done, is that it's now just no longer just about you want a good education so that you can go to college or succeed. It's that we're now learning that too many kids are subjected to a horrible education. And in fact, there are schools in Pennsylvania from Erie to South Philly. And as we go crisscross the state, and I grew up in South Philly, so I always do my South Philly plug. But as we look Erie to South Philly, we now know that there are school districts where not only the schools do poorly, but the longer you're there, your proficiency grows down. 30% of the fourth graders can read, but 28% of the eighth graders can read, but 18% of the 11th graders. The longer you're there, you do work. So to me, it is an academics issue. It is an economics issue. We cannot stop being a state that shrinks and become a state that attracts employers and people if you can't find employees. And to me, at the risk of saying, to me, it's the moral issue of our day. We are relegating children to put them on a path to failure. And I would share with your listeners who are listening from anywhere in Pennsylvania or even outside, we all care if there are schools that are demonstrably bad. And I leave it for you in the legislature to say, how do we hold the superintendents accountable? What I want us to understand is that every child that leaves a school in Philadelphia, every child that leaves a school in Harrisburg and can't read and can't write and can't take care of themselves, they're on a path that we're going to pay for. They're unlikely to be able to provide themselves. And so every child that we teach to read, to do math, to solve problems, to play well with others is someone that's on a path to being a responsible adult. When it isn't, we're all left holding the bag. That's to me why it's academic and economic. It's a moral calling. We have to empower parents, let them go find a school that works.
Yeah, so my two focuses, I'd say, since I've taken office are school choice and making Pennsylvania competitive again. And they're inextricably linked, I've found. So lightning round question here, Guy. In the space of school choice, as I've traveled the state, I've garnered feedback, I've reached out to stakeholders, constituents, Pennsylvanians. One very interesting thing is that the students who arguably need it the most in the city of Philadelphia, statistically, I think you could easily make the argument that some of the lower achieving schools are aggregated there. I've found that their representatives, those students and families who are struggling to get out, are very opposed to school choice. Now, how could this be?
Well, unfortunately, it's politics, right? It's the fear of the teachers union and acceptance of the status quo. And so they've couched it now in terms of money. So if you will, they either ignore the problem, the bad test scores and the crime in the schools. As I say, these are places, these are neighborhoods most of us wouldn't want to drive through, and we would never send our children there on purpose, by choice. So I think what's happened is those legislators see this problem and they either ignore it and hope it doesn't come up, or when it does, the argument is, well, the school's failing because we need more money. Mm-hmm. And I'll leave you with this. When I attended my first school choice rally, Philadelphia was spending $8,000 a child. Philadelphia is now spending $24,000 a child, spending close to $30,000 in high school. And your listeners, your viewers are contributing to that. The vast majority of kids in those schools cannot read, cannot write, cannot do grade level work. So we need to have a rescue mission, and those from outside of the city are going to have to, pardon the phrase, we're going to have to trump them and help those kids, because it's the reason to do it. It's the only way to lift them up. If their local officials won't, we'll have to. And that's why I appreciate your leadership looking out for kids that aren't necessarily in your district, but it's the right thing to do.
Yep, very true. I often say, I echo Pastor Josh Robertson's words in saying that it's the lack of school choice is the civil rights issue of our era. He is Guy Ciarrocchi. He is a newsman. He's a school choice advocate. He wears a lot of hats. Thanks so much for joining the show today, Guy.
This has been Straight to the Point. Visit repjod.com/mypodcasts.